talking shelters. I've got my 4 shelters that I've got out here with me. I brought one out because I had to seam seal it and waterproof it because I'm taking it to a music festival here in a few weeks. Figured it'd be a good time to kind of go through them a little bit, show you what I got, show you what I use it for, give you a little breakdown of each one, and then if I've done any little mods to them, I'll show you that. And alright, first up is this big behemoth. It is my Cabela's alaknak 10x10. I've used this deer hunting a couple years for rifle season. It's got the stove jack in it. I've used it bow hunting for a few trips. I'm actually bringing it to a music festival here in a few weeks, which is why I've got it set up and cleaning it out. And I just did some real sloppy seam sealing on it. I don't care how it looks as long as it holds water out. That's the point. And this thing is massive. By myself, it takes me half hour, 40-ish minutes to set up. I bet it weighs 60, 70 pounds, something like that for the whole thing. Yeah, we'll give you a quick tour around this thing and show you what it's all about. We got a fairly decent sized front door. I have to duck a little bit to get in there. It's really sturdy in the wind with all these guy out points. We've got a stove jack that zips up in here. Each side has a window that has a little clear vinyl zip out on it. These are just more vents than windows, but lets in all the fresh air and doesn't let any rain in. Backside's the same way. This thing is super tall. I can stand up in there and I could probably do jumping jacks if I wanted to. Well, I'm about 5'10" and can't reach the top. Oh, it's warm in here. Holy crap. Flip down little storage all the way through. Here's the windows and the vents. And here we've got the zip back floor for the wood stove. You zip that back so you don't melt the bottom. And then we got the stove jack here. This is honestly one of my more favorite tents. The only downside is obviously the weight and the setup time, but it's super comfy. Me and Ryan used this spring on our turkey hunt, and I had a cot and he just slept on an air mattress on the floor and worked fairly well. Plenty of room for 2 guys and gear, that's for sure. Next up, we got my Seek Outside Cimarron. This is my cooler weather camping and hunting tent. I've got the bug nest set up on the inside. I've also got some liners for it for a little colder weather. I do have a wood stove for it, a little titanium Seek Outside wood stove. This setup isn't cheap. I bet I've got more money into this setup than I do my Cabela's tent, and the Cabela's tent is twice as big. Between the tent itself, the bug nest, the liners, and the wood stove, it's a good chunk of money. I'm not gonna say how much, but if you want to go seek outside, you're gonna spend some cash, but it's well worth it. The tent is fairly lightweight. The tent itself is only, I don't know, a pound or 2. It's probably 2.5, 3 pounds with my inner in it. Maybe 3 pounds total with the tent, the inner, and the stakes and the carbon fiber pole I've got for it. But this thing is pretty comfy too. So the inner here, the nest, this is an actual 2-person nest. You can fit 2 people in here, just like any other 2-person tent. You better really like that second person. A guy and a dog and gear, and this tent is huge. Mansion for 1 guy and his gear. 2 guys and a stove. I wouldn't have any gear in here, but that can definitely be done as well. I do have Seek's carbon fiber pole here, and their liner here, which I tried putting up, but it's kind of a pain. Just a little extra thin material, and then where's the cup? It's just got this little cup that goes up over the center pole, and then these just get staked out right next to the tent body, connected to your ground stakes. Mine still smell like wood smoke since I used them last winter. Yeah, I used this tent last year on a fishing trip, and I had room in here for obviously my gear. I had 2 totes worth of extra gear, like the totes that carried all my camping and fishing gear, and I still had room to spare in here. The one thing I would recommend is their line lock system for the tie out points if you plan on using this in the summertime. Otherwise it gets real warm because there's no draft, so that also leads to pretty bad condensation. It's a single wall tent, so condensation is always going to be a thing. You just you learn how to work around it or learn how to mitigate it the best you can. So we've got the mesh, which has plenty of space around it between the mesh and the tent body, so you get plenty of ventilation. But look at all this extra room you got in here. This thing is just massive. It's a 2-door setup, so you can get in and out to either side, or each guy has their own door if you're going with 2 people. The line lock system I was talking about is just this little piece right here. It ties off to your stake loop, but then you can also, it helps lift the tent up off the ground a little bit, and you can tension it however you need it, so it helps get a little better pitch to the tent. You got your little peak vent up here. I don't know how well these actually work, but it's got the wire on the inside, so you can close it down or open it up as much as you want. Also got the stove jack on this side. Just held down with some Velcro. And that's all it is. And when I first got this thing, I was a little worried about rain getting in there, but that's never been an issue so far. And there's the carbon fiber center pole. You can use trekking poles if you've got the connector pieces. So up next is my Lanshan 2. It's got a removable bug net, and then they've got I guess it would be a 4th season inner that has less mesh and more actual material for winter camping. I just bought it this year. I used it once already this year on a hunt out in western North Dakota this spring for turkey. It went through a pretty heavy rain out there and held all the water out. I did seam seal. You don't have to, but I seam seal most of my tents no matter what. So I gave it a seam seal, and now it should be 100% no doubt waterproof. This thing is pretty lightweight. It's a trekking pole tent, just held up by the 2 trekking poles on each side. Body itself weighs maybe a pound, a little more, and then whatever stakes you decide to use. I have done a couple mods on it just to make it a little bit more comfortable. Show you the inside here. So here we are on the inside of this thing. As you can see, it's fairly big too. It's a 2-person, they say. Again, you really gotta like that second person you're in here with. One guy, it's a palace. So for some of the mods I've done here, the way this thing comes, they just have one line going, I think it was from this tie out here, and went out to a stake and then back down to the bottom, which I wasn't a real big fan of. So now I just tied that so it's got the 2 connection points up top, and I can run that stake way out and it'll give it a little bit more stability. On the bottom here, all I've got is a stake with a little piece of zinget on it with a loop, and then I ran some shock cord onto the loops here, and I just use a carabiner, and I can unhook both of them or one of them depending on how much airflow I want to get. It's the same on this side too. I do like that it's got the dual doors and vestibule, so you can get all sorts of airflow through there. All right, so here we are with the newest and the most fun to play with right now, mostly just because it's a new toy. It is my Dutchware chameleon hammock. If you know anything about Dutchware hammocks, they've got all sorts of goodies you can buy for them. In another video, I go through everything in a little bit more detail, but I've got a winter cover, my bug net, my tarp is a war bonnet mini fly. This is the second hammock I owned a few years ago. I had a war bonnet Blackbird XLC with their Superfly tarp, which is their huge winter tarp, which was awesome, but it was more than I needed. It is pretty damn cozy. I've got my underquilt for it. The one I've got right now that came with it is kind of a cheapie. Not a real big fan of it. I've got a hammock gear underquilt on the way right now. My top quilt is way overkill right now, but it's a hammock gear 0 degree. But that's the nice thing about quilts. You can kind of use them, you know, year round. Just kick a leg out or something if you get too warm. Even with it being a 0 degree, I slept in here last night and it only got down to about, I don't know, 55, 60 degrees, and I actually never got overly hot, so pretty nice. All right, so the last thing we're gonna cover here is the pack size. So with all of these, no matter what I'm sleeping in, I'm always gonna have a sleeping bag, so that can go kind of along with any of them. The hammock, I'm always gonna have an underquilt, and people say you're carrying more gear with a hammock, but tenting, you can substitute this for a sleeping pad. I know they can get pretty bulky depending on what kind you have, or they can be real tiny too. Either way, you're bringing insulation on a sleeping pad, so either one of these are always going to go with me. The alaknak 10x10 here is obviously the biggest and the heaviest. I don't know, I would say for its size, it's not a whole lot of stuff. It's still a lot to lug around, and I would just ballparking, I'd say 60 to 70 pounds for the whole thing. So my hammock setup is just the tarp, the hammock, my stakes, and my tree straps. I would say this whole thing, I don't know, a couple of pounds, not bad at all. A toss up between this and my Lanshan for which one is the lightest and packs up the smallest. Doesn't take up very much space in a pack. All right, so next is the Lanshan. That's it, that's the whole thing right there. Stakes. Downside is you gotta have trekking poles, or I suppose you could use a couple sets of carbon fiber poles, but if you're a hiker, or I don't know, I know quite a few hunters that use trekking poles on their hunts, so less thing to actually carry. And then yeah, just these right here. Weighs not very much at all, packs down absolutely tiny. And last but not least is my Seek Outside Cimarron. I've got the tent right here, the mesh inner in this pouch, the carbon fiber pole from Seek Outside, and an assortment of different style stakes. And then I just use a piece of Tyvek for a ground cloth, which I use under the Lanshan as well. I've actually got the tent and the bug net in the pouches that the liner comes in, because they're a little bit smaller. They fit, but it's tight. Packs down a little bit smaller that way. But it's a little bit bigger, but the comfort for this thing is just absolutely second to none. All right, well there we have it. There's all my shelters and what I use them for, and ballpark weight. And if you guys have any questions about them, just comment down below. But I finally got all my shelters kind of dialed in on what I really like. So they've all got their place, and I really like all of them. Until next time, we'll see you guys later.